Fort Hood, Texas, April 22nd, 2020. That's the setting. And the name we really need to focus on today is Vanessa Guillén.
Right. A name many of us probably remember. It started as this horrifying local story, but it quickly blew up nationally.
It really did. But as we're going to explore in this deep dive, looking at the source material, her story became, well, much bigger than just a single tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. It turned into this pivotal moment, really high stakes, that basically forced the entire U.S. military to look inward.
To confront some really deep systemic problems. And it led to some of the most significant legislative reforms in military justice history.
That's what we're digging into today. We want to go way beyond those initial, heartbreaking headlines that were everywhere for weeks.
So our mission for this deep dive?
Well, it's to analyze the whole picture. The crime itself, obviously, but also the investigation, which was frustrating for many involved. Then the accountability, what actually happened at Fort Hood afterwards, and crucially, the major legal changes, the actual federal laws that happened because of her case.
And we also need to touch on the, let's say, difficult political controversies that popped up years later. Around her memory, the family's fight.
Yeah, that's part of the story too. Got to cover it.
Okay, so before we get into the systemic stuff, let's just establish the basic facts. Vanessa Guillén, she was 20 years old, a U.S. Army specialist at Fort Hood.
Part of the 3rd Cavalry Regiment.
And the sources confirm she was bludgeoned to death inside an armory.
By a fellow soldier, Aaron David Robinson. This was April 22nd, 2020.
But her remains,
Yeah.
they weren't found for over 2 months. Late June.
Yeah.
Dismembered, buried.
Yeah, which just amplified the horror and, frankly, the public outcry and the distrust of the military's handling of it from day one.
It really galvanized people. Okay, let's start digging into Section 1. Vanessa herself, Fort Hood, and this hidden crisis bubbling underneath.
Right. To really get the weight of this, you need to know a bit about Vanessa Guillén herself. She wasn't just a statistic.
No.
She was, by all accounts, a really ambitious young woman. From Houston, born September 30, 1999.
Strong Mexican-American roots, right? Her parents were from Zacatecas, Mexico.
Exactly, and she was sharp. Graduated high school in 2018, Cesar E. Chavez High, in the top 15% of her class. High achiever.
Sources mentioned she was really active too, like soccer, jogging, very focused.
Yeah, seemed very driven. And joining the Army wasn't just a whim, it was a serious goal for her. She enlisted right after high school, June 2018.
Her job in the Army, her MOS, was 91F. Now, for listeners maybe not familiar, what does that mean exactly?
That's a small arms and artillery repair. So basically she worked on weapons maintenance.
Which put her right there,
Yeah.
in the armory, the place where units keep their weapons secure. That was her workplace with the 3rd Cavalry Regiment.
And that detail, working in the armory, becomes tragically central to the crime itself.
Her life was cut short, obviously, but the Army did posthumously advance her rank to specialist. That was July 1st, 2020. A recognition, sorts.
Well, a small one, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the day she disappeared. April 22nd. Last seen around 1 p.m. Where?
In the parking lot of her unit's headquarters building. But here's the immediate red flag. The thing that told everyone this wasn't just someone walking off.
Her stuff.
Exactly. Her car keys, her Army ID card, her bank card, her barracks key, all found inside the armory where she worked.
She left everything essential behind. You just don't do that. Especially not a soldier known for being disciplined.
No way. You don't leave the base. You don't go anywhere without your ID, your keys. It screamed foul play from the start.
And this is where the story pivots, right?
Yeah.
From just a missing person to something deeper. This issue of sexual harassment.
Yes. Before she vanished, Vanessa had told friends, told her family, that she was being sexually harassed.
And she named someone.
She identified him as her supervisor. We now know that was Aaron David Robinson.
But she didn't report it officially. Why not?
Fear. Plain and simple, the sources are really clear on this. She refused to make an official report.
Because she was scared of retaliation.
Terrified.
Yeah.
And think about how you reported back then. It went through the chain of command.
So she'd have to report her supervisor to the command structure that, possibly included people who knew him, maybe even protected him.
Precisely. It's a classic impossible situation for victims. And there was another layer here, a really difficult one.
Her family situation.
Yeah. Her mother was an undocumented immigrant. The sources suggest this added this crushing weight of fear. Fear of rocking the boat, fear of attracting any negative attention from authorities.
Wow. So that fear just silenced her.
And sadly, that silence wasn't unusual at Fort Hood, it seems. This wasn't just about Robinson, apparently.
What do you mean?
Well, reports indicate that other female soldiers had actually made complaints against the same sergeant, against Robinson.
What happened to those complaints?
Dismissed, reportedly just brushed aside by officials.
So the system was already sending a message. Don't bother reporting, we won't listen, or worse, we'll protect the accused.
It creates that exact culture of impunity you mentioned, which made the initial investigation even harder.
Yeah, let's talk about that initial investigation. It involved multiple agencies, right? Army CID, FBI, local police, Texas Rangers.
A big effort on paper. But from the very beginning, Vanessa's family was deeply, deeply distrustful and vocal about it.
They felt like they were being stonewalled.
Completely. Kept in the dark is the phrase they used. The Army was releasing very few details, sometimes conflicting ones. The transparency just wasn't there.
And that lack of information, that perceived lack of urgency from the Army, it fueled this huge public reaction.
Massive. Her sister Mara, her mother Gloria, they became these incredibly powerful advocates. They weren't taking the Army's vague answers.
And people responded. That rally in June 2020, hundreds protesting right at the gates of Fort Hood, demanding answers.
That public pressure was immense. And groups like LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, they stepped up too, adding significant money to the reward fund.
So it wasn't just a quiet internal Army matter anymore. It became this high-profile national search, largely because the family and the public refused to let it be swept under the rug.
Absolutely critical pressure.
What?
Which leads us into Section 2. The discovery, the confession, and identifying who was responsible.
Right. Things really started moving at the end of June 2020. The breakthrough.
Yeah.
It was grim.
Horrifyingly so. June 30th, Army investigators get called out to this spot along the Leon River in Belton, Texas. It's miles away from Fort Hood.
Why were they called out?
Private contractors working in the area had found partial human remains.
And you mentioned earlier this area had been searched before.
It had, yeah. About 10 days prior, actually. The investigators believed the remains had been buried, probably under concrete.
Concrete.
Yeah, and then possibly dug up or disturbed by animal activity in the days between the searches, which speaks volumes about the effort to hide them.
It wasn't just a shallow grave.
Not at all. Tim Miller, he's the director of Texas EquiSearch, the volunteer group that helped search extensively. He went on record saying it was the most sophisticated burial site he'd ever seen.
Decades of experience. And that's what he said. It suggests real planning, real effort to make sure she was never found.
Exactly. Premeditation, not just panic. And once those remains were found, things moved fast to identify the suspects.
Aaron David Robinson, her supervisor. 20 years old, a combat engineer specialist.
And Cecily Ann Aguilar, 22 years old, a local woman. She was Robinson's girlfriend, and importantly, the estranged wife of another soldier at Fort Hood.
Aguilar became the key, didn't she?
She did. She was interviewed again the same evening the remains were found, and she cracked. She confessed that Robinson told her he'd killed a female soldier at Fort Hood.
And that she helped him?
Admitted helping him dispose of the body, dismemberment, transport, burial, the whole horrific process.
So law enforcement moved immediately on that confession.
Right away. They had Aguilar make a controlled phone call to Robinson. Monitored, recorded.
What happened on that call?
That's where Robinson basically sealed his fate. Aguilar told him about the discovery, and he said, according to the sources, "Baby, they found pieces."
Chilling. Did he deny anything?
No. Aguilar even texted him news articles about the discovery, and he didn't deny any of the facts. It confirmed he knew he was involved.
So the criminal complaint then laid out the awful details. Robinson beat Guillén to death with a hammer inside the armory back on April 22nd.
Yes. And Aguilar allegedly helped him afterwards, dismembering the body, trying to burn it, burying the remains near the river.
What happened immediately after Robinson realized the remains were found?
Chaos. He learned about the discovery and he fled Fort Hood. He was actually briefly detained by his unit, supposedly for violating COVID quarantine rules.
Wait, COVID rules?
Yeah, sounds like a pretext maybe. But he managed to escape from an unarmed guard overseeing him. Shows you the confusion on post. Before police could catch him in Guillén, the town next to Fort Hood, in the early hours of July 1st, Robinson shot himself with a handgun, died by suicide.
So he never faced trial for the murder itself?
Never. Which left this huge void for the family. No day in court for the actual killer.
But Aguilar was apprehended. What happened with her?
She faced federal charges. Initially, conspiracy to tamper with evidence. Later, a much broader indictment in 2021, 11 counts related to the cover-up.
Did she go to trial?
No, she eventually pleaded guilty in November 2022 to accessory to murder after the fact, and 3 counts of making false statements.
And the sentence.
August 2023, she received the maximum, 30 years in federal prison. So there was accountability for the cover-up, at least.
Okay, let's move to Section 3, the motive. This is where it gets really disturbing in terms of the why, because Vanessa's fear was sexual harassment.
Right, but the trigger for the murder itself, according to Aguilar's confession, detailed in that Texas DPS report from May 2022, it was something else entirely.
What was it?
Robinson killed Guillén because she saw his cell phone lock screen.
His lock screen. What was on it?
A picture of Cecily Aguilar?
Wait, just seeing a picture of his girlfriend, that led to murder. That seems wildly disproportionate.
It does, until you layer in the specific Army context. Remember, Aguilar was married to another soldier at Fort Hood.
Fraternization rule.
Exactly. Robinson was terrified of getting busted for violating Army fraternization rules, having an affair with the wife of another soldier, especially if he was in a supervisory position relative to Guillén who might report it. That could lead to serious punishment. Loss of rank, discharge.
So he was more afraid of getting in trouble for fraternization than anything else.
Yeah.
So afraid he killed her to silence her about that.
That's what the confessed motive indicates. He saw the potential career damage from breaking that specific rule as so catastrophic, so immediate, that murder seemed like the way to prevent her from reporting it.
That is a terrifying insight into his mindset and maybe the culture. Why would the fear of that rule be so much stronger than, say, the fear of getting caught for murder?
Well, think back to that permissive environment we talked about. The culture had shown, or at least he might have believed, that sexual harassment claims could be ignored, swept away.
Right. Other women had complained about him, reportedly with no consequences.
Exactly. So maybe he trusted the system to bury that. But fraternization? That's an administrative violation. It reflects poorly on the unit's discipline, on command. Maybe he thought that would be punished severely and swiftly.
So he gambled that the Army cared more about enforcing fraternization rules than investigating potential sexual harassment or even murder. He chose murder to protect his career from an administrative issue.
It points to a deeply warped sense of priorities, fueled by the very culture that ignored Vanessa's earlier fears. It's the ultimate systemic failure, really. The environment that dismissed harassment fears also created conditions where fear of fraternization discipline became a motive for homicide.
And that toxic environment at Fort Hood, it wasn't just about Vanessa, was it? During the search for her, other tragedies came to light.
Painfully so. It was a truly dark period for that base. While everyone was looking for Vanessa, the remains of 2 other missing Fort Hood soldiers were found.
2 others. In that same time frame.
Yes. First, PVT Gregory Weddle Morales. He was 23, had actually been missing since August 2019. His skeletal remains were found in a field near Fort Hood on June 19, 2020. His death was later ruled undetermined, adding more mystery.
And the second one?
PVT Medjor Morta, 26 years old. His body was found near Stillhouse Hollow Lake on July 17th. His death was later ruled a suicide.
So while the nation is gripped by Vanessa's case, you have these other soldiers turning up dead around the same base. It paints a picture of a place with serious, serious problems.
Absolutely. It wasn't just one horrific, isolated incident. It suggested a pattern, a breakdown in soldier welfare, safety, oversight. It really shook public confidence in the base leadership.
Before we shift to the changes that came later, we should also acknowledge the family's lingering questions, particularly Vanessa's mother, Gloria. She never fully accepted the official story of Robinson's death, did she?
No, she didn't. She spoke publicly about witnesses she'd talked to near the scene of his death. They claimed they heard 2 gunshots, not 1 suicide shot.
And based on that?
Based on that, she's maintained this belief that Robinson might have been executed by authorities, maybe as part of a cover-up, perhaps fearing what he might reveal about others if taken into custody.
So while officials say suicide, the family's profound distrust of the Army, born from that initial experience, it leads them to question everything, even the killer's death.
Understandably so. Their pursuit of justice has always been tied to this feeling that the full truth, potentially involving others higher up, hasn't come out.
Okay, let's turn to Section 4. The systemic changes and the accountability that did happen, because the pressure became unbearable for the military.
Totally. The combination of Vanessa's horrific murder, the other deaths, the family's relentless advocacy, the massive public outcry, it forced the Army's hand.
So July 10, 2020, what happened?
Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy orders a full independent review of Fort Hood. This wasn't just an internal look, it was meant to be objective.
Who did the review?
A 5-member civilian committee. Their specific job was to assess the command climate, the culture at Fort Hood, especially regarding sexual harassment and assault policies.
And their findings. When did those come out?
December 2020. And they were scathing, absolutely damning.
What were the key takeaways?
Multiple leadership failures was a major finding. Not just mistakes, but failures in responsibility from commanders down the line. Failing to maintain standards, failing to investigate properly.
You're reading a climate where soldiers couldn't trust the system.
Exactly. But the bombshell phrase, the one that confirmed everything advocates had been saying, was that there was a permissive environment for sexual assault and sexual harassment at Fort Hood.
Permissive environment. That's a direct indictment of the leadership and the culture they allowed.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a few bad apples, it was the barrel itself.
Precisely. It acknowledged the problem was institutional, and the Army's response this time was unusually swift and severe.
Disciplinary actions.
Big time. Unprecedented, really. 14 commanders and other leaders at Fort Hood were disciplined, removed from command, suspended. Action was taken.
Who are we talking about here? Any high-ranking names?
Oh, yeah. Major General Scott Eflint, who was effectively running the base at the time. Colonel Ralph Overland, commander of Vanessa's regiment. The 3rd Cav, Command Sergeant Major Bradley Knapp. All disciplined.
And others were suspended, too.
Right. Major General Jeffrey Broadwater and Command Sergeant Major Thomas Kenny of the 1st Cavalry Division were suspended while another investigation happened.
Though we should note, Broadwater was later cleared and reassigned, so the process wasn't simple, but the initial sweep was broad.
Very broad. And Secretary McCarthy framed it as bigger than just Fort Hood. He said Vanessa's murder shocked our conscience and pointed to deeper problems across the whole Army.
So Fort Hood became the catalyst for Army-wide changes in how sexual assault and harassment were handled.
That was the intent. Using this tragedy to force a hard look in the mirror across the entire service.
And beyond the military's internal actions, there was legal fallout, too. The family sued.
Yes. In August 2022, the Guillén family filed a major civil lawsuit against the U.S. Army. They're seeking $35 million in damages.
On what grounds?
Wrongful death, sexual harassment, assault. Basically arguing the Army was negligent, that they failed to protect Vanessa, ignored the warning signs, dismissed complaints, and ultimately created the conditions that led to her death.
That lawsuit is still ongoing.
As far as sources indicate, yes. It's another front in their fight for accountability, this time seeking financial responsibility from the institution itself.
Which brings us to Section 5, the legislative and cultural legacy. This is where the impact becomes really concrete and lasting.
Absolutely. This is arguably the most significant outcome. Her case literally changed federal law. A legislative tsunami, as you called it.
Where did it start? State level first.
Yeah, Texas moved first. June 2021, Governor Abbott signed the state's Vanessa Guillén Act, SB 623.
What did the Texas law do?
Crucially, it created procedures for Texas military members to report sexual assault or harassment outside their direct chain of command. It offered protection against retaliation, the very thing Vanessa feared most.
So an external reporting option within Texas. But the big change was federal.
That was the game changer. That core idea, taking reporting and prosecution out of the commander's hands, went national. Through the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, signed in late December 2021. It included key provisions from the proposed federal I Am Vanessa Guillén Act.
And what did those provisions do to the military justice system, the UCMJ? This was a massive shift, right? Commanders used to hold all the cards.
Totally. For decades, the unit commander decided whether to investigate, whether to prosecute crimes within their unit, even if the commander or someone they favored was implicated. Huge conflict of interest potential.
So what changed?
The I Am Vanessa Guillén Act provisions mandated that investigations into sexual harassment and the decision to prosecute serious related offenses like sexual assault would now be handled outside that service member's immediate command structure.
By who? Who makes the call now?
They created the Office of Special Trial Counsel, the OSTC. These are independent, specialized military prosecutors. They now have the authority to decide whether to prosecute these specific cases.
Taking it away from the potentially biased commander. That directly addresses the power imbalance Vanessa faced.
Directly. And it also explicitly added protections against retaliation for reporting. Then there was another step just after that.
Go on.
January 2022, President Biden signed Executive Order 14062. This formally made sexual harassment a specific crime under the UCMJ.
It wasn't before. How was it handled?
Often under vague articles like conduct unbecoming or disorderly conduct, harder to prove, sometimes lesser penalties. Making it a standalone offense gives it more teeth, more clarity.
Okay, so state law for external reporting, Federal law taking commanders out of the prosecution decision for serious cases, and a specific UCMJ offense for sexual harassment. That is a profound legal legacy. Nonpartisan changes affecting the entire U.S. military.
Huge. And her legacy is also cemented in memorials, ensuring people don't forget. Those murals in Houston are powerful, showing her with both the U.S. and Mexican flags.
Reflecting her heritage and the community support.
And even at Fort Hood itself, now renamed Fort Cavazos, of course,
Right.
the main gate for her unit, the 3rd Cavalry Regiment, was renamed the Vanessa Guillén Gate back in April 2021. There's a plaque.
So every day, soldiers entering that area are reminded.
A constant reminder of the cost of failure and the changes she inspired. There's also a post office named after her in Houston.
And her story continues to be told through media, too. The 2020 episode, that Netflix documentary.
I Am Vanessa Guillén, yeah.
Yeah.
And that title itself, I Am Vanessa Guillén, came from that social media movement right after her family revealed her harassment claims.
It wasn't using a hashtag symbol, but it was that phrase spreading online.
Exactly. It became this rallying cry. So many service members, current and former, saw their own experiences reflected. People who felt silenced finally had a voice, united under her name.
Okay, moving toward the end, Section 6. We need to address that political controversy that emerged much later, in October 2024, about the funeral costs. This requires careful handling, sticking just to the sources.
Absolutely. Very sensitive, very political. The core allegation came from an article in The Atlantic.
What did it allege?
It alleged that former President Trump, after meeting with the Guillén family back in July 2020 and supposedly promising to cover her funeral costs, later refused to pay.
And the article cited sources.
2 anonymous sources, citing contemporaneous notes from that meeting. They claimed Trump got angry about the cost, allegedly using offensive language about her heritage, burying a flipping Mexican, was the reported, quote, and told his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, not to pay the reported $60,000 bill.
Extremely serious allegations. The article also claimed he remained angry later, saying people were trying to rip him off.
Yeah, explosive stuff. Especially given the family's grief at the time.
But there were immediate and strong denials, right?
Yes, absolutely crucial to note. A Trump campaign spokesperson and Mark Meadows himself denied Trump made those remarks about the cost or her heritage. They disputed that account of the meeting.
And what about the family? What was their reaction to the article?
This is key. Vanessa's sister, Mara Guillén, who was at the meeting, went public on social media. She said the story was exploiting her sister for politics. She stated very clearly that President Trump had shown nothing but respect to her family and Vanessa.
So a direct contradiction between the anonymous sources and a family member who was actually there.
A direct conflict. And the family's lawyer, Natalie Kawam, added another layer. She confirmed she had sent a funeral bill to the White House and no payment was received. But she strongly accused The Atlantic's editor of misrepresenting her client's experience and, again, exploiting them for cheap political gain. She specifically called out the timing.
Yeah, 4 years after the meeting, just 2 weeks before a major election. That timing raised questions for Kawam.
It did. So you have anonymous sources with direct quotes versus public denials from the campaign, Meadows, and crucially, the Guillén family themselves feeling used by the story. A very contested situation.
Okay, so let's bring this deep dive together. Final thoughts.
Looking back, it's just undeniable how Vanessa Guillén's personal tragedy made infinitely worse by the Army's failure to address her fears about sexual harassment. How that directly ignited a revolution in military justice.
It really is an incredible, though tragic, example of how public pressure and a family's absolute refusal to give up can force monumental change. Landmark laws passed with bipartisan support.
The I Am Vanessa Guillén Act provisions, the UCMJ changes, they fundamentally altered the mechanisms for handling misconduct. They aim to fix the structural flaws, the power imbalances.
Taking power away from the potentially conflicted commander, giving victims a safer path.
Right. The laws are on the books. The chain of command is, on paper, bypassed for investigating and prosecuting these specific crimes. That addresses the formal structure that failed Vanessa.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There is, and this is the crucial question we have to leave you, the listener, with. We know about that deeply embedded permissive environment. We know about the decades of command culture. So how effective will these new laws actually be?
Will changing the rules on paper be enough to change the day-to-day reality, the fundamental command climate, that culture of fear and retaliation across the military?
Can you legislate away deeply ingrained cultural norms? Is removing the commander's authority in these cases enough to truly conquer that institutional resistance, that fear of reprisal that silenced Vanessa?
That's the ongoing challenge. That's the question at the heart of her painful, powerful, and still evolving legacy.